the U.S. government's debt is $31 trillion and growing by someplace on the order of $1 to $2 trillion per year. So there's really nothing they can do about it at this point. Most government spending doesn't come from taxes from individuals and corporations. It comes from selling debt to the Federal Reserve, which then the U.S. government goes out and spends. I'll tell you what's going to happen is that since the U.S. dollar is a floating abstraction, and all of these governments realize that it's losing value by 5 or 10% or something on that order per year. So, they don't like the idea that they have to settle their debts through New York. I mean, you think the Chinese like to pay for things with U.S. dollars? It's using their adversaries' currency. What they're going to do is go back to gold. People say, well, maybe we'll use the Chinese yuan. No, nobody trusts the Chinese and their yuan either. So, and look, the Russians and the Chinese, when they trade with each other, until recently, had to use dollars. But they don't want to use dollars, but they don't trust each other's currencies either. And why should they? They're just paper figments of their central bank's imagination. The whole world is going to go back to gold, Danielle. That's what's going to happen. People are going to trade with gold. Again, it's going to happen.
I'm happy you're bringing that up. I actually did a whole in-depth conversation with Frank Giustra, who you know well, back in October about this. And in one of his recent articles, we were talking about the record buying we saw from central banks in 2022. He says the likely buyers are the usual suspects. We know China, Russia, India, and Saudi Arabia. But he says, why would they be doing this without some future purpose? A likely reason is that a gold backing would give any new trading currency the credibility it would need to compete with the reigning US dollar. So do you agree? I'm assuming you're agreeing with this thesis, but why are, if China is stockpiling gold, not telling anyone about it, we don't know the real numbers, what are they planning to do with it? Is it some sort of new gold-backed currency? I'm assuming you would think yes. Am I wrong?
Well, ideally, there shouldn't be a gold-backed currency. Gold is money, and it should be used as money. And I know this is going to sound outrageous to everybody listening, but the government shouldn't be in the money business, okay? That's not what the government should be doing. I mean, the purpose of the government, which is actually just an instrument of force, is to protect you from force. An army, a police force, and a court system to adjudicate disputes without resorting to force. So they shouldn't be in the money business. They're not trustworthy. The type of people who go to work for the government are innately untrustworthy. So we should just be using gold. But the answer to the question is yes. I suspect that the first step on this road is going to be that the Chinese and even the Russians are going to start out with a gold-backed ruble and a gold-backed yuan. It's going to happen. And at that point, if they show themselves to be somewhat trustworthy, people are going to gravitate away from the dollar because the U.S. government is a bankrupt entity at this point. Why should you trust their currency? I mean, it's ridiculous. And we'll go back to gold. There's really nothing else you can use.
And there's nothing
the
U.S. can do to stop it.
No, there's nothing they can do to stop it. People say, well, maybe the world will go to Bitcoin. Well, maybe it will. I mean, there are certain advantages to Bitcoin as money, but I'm putting my money on gold, although I own some Bitcoin.
And that's what brings me to your other key forecast for this year. Is you say clearly it's going to be the year of gold. And anyone I know that's been following our work will say, but you've liked gold for so long. But would you not agree, Doug, that it just feels different this time around?
It does. We're heading into a major crisis. Look, for years I've said that we're entering upon a phenomenon that I call the Greater Depression, because it's going to be much worse, much longer lasting, and much more much different than the unpleasantness of 1929 to 1946. And how do I feel about gold? Look, I've been saying for the last several years, it's going up, but it's money, okay? So you ought to treat it as a savings vehicle, not as a speculative vehicle. And I've consistently bought gold for many, many years, and I've never sold a single ounce. So I've been buying it since about $40, and now it's about, $1,900. So I feel better having saved in gold than in dollars, but I don't, sometimes it's a good speculation. But right now, it's kind of reasonably priced relative to everything else in the world, relative to a suit of clothes, relative to a meal. You go back historically, gold's kind of reasonably priced. But I still think it's going to go up because I think that we're on the edge of a panic. And when a real panic hits, people like to hold money that is tangible in their own hand, not the promise of some bankrupt government or bankrupt central bank. So that's why I think gold's going higher. Reasonably priced at this point, but it's going higher.
Well, especially if the central banks want to hoard it, they want it. If everyone is going to want gold, and as we know, not as much exploration is taking place. We're not finding these gold deposits. So yeah, to your point, what will it do to the price?
There's all kinds of things going on that most people haven't even heard about. For instance, when I was in Zimbabwe the last time, it was about, how long ago now? 6 years. I spent a lot of time. Well, I've been to Zimbabwe and most African countries a lot over the years, but here's an anecdote that you haven't heard anywhere else. I became very friendly with Gideon Gono. Gideon Gono was the head of the Central Bank of Zimbabwe. And oddly enough, Gideon Gono's signature is on the Zimbabwe $100 trillion note. But he's actually a well-educated, intelligent guy. You think he'd be a blithering idiot having printed up $100 trillion notes. Well, he had to do it to pay the army. But here's the thing that's interesting. Gideon gave me a paper that he wrote promoting that he was trying to sell to Comrade Mugabe, who's dead now, that they ought to have a Zimbabwe gold dollar. Now, that's a shocker. Most people don't know that. So there are things going on behind the scenes that we don't hear about on CNN or MSNBC or Fox.
No, and thank you for sharing that with us. I also curious to get your thoughts on inflation. I know how you feel about CPI. You don't buy the numbers. Whatever figures or metrics they're using are cherry picked. What's the real deal? What's your take on inflation, Doug?
It's going higher. And the main reason, there are other reasons, but the main reason it's going higher is because the main way that governments all over the world can finance themselves is not by taxes, it's by printing money. So when they print money, that is the cause of inflation. It's not the butcher or the baker or the gasoline maker that causes inflation. They're just reacting to it, the excess of money printed by these central banks. So inflation is going higher. It's going a lot higher. And the only reason it won't go higher is that maybe we'll have a catastrophic deflation where there's so much debt in the world as a consequence of inflation. A lot of these companies and a lot of individuals are greatly over indebted. The economy slows down. They can't pay the debt. They default on their bonds. And what happens to that $1 billion in bonds that a company might have issued? Well, it just dies and goes to money heaven, and the $1 billion it represents disappears. Same thing when an individual goes bankrupt. We're going to see a lot of that this year and the next. So that could get out of control. You could have a catastrophic deflation, even while the government is still printing up money, trying to maintain